It's said that a reporter's job is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Unfortunately, on immigration, it doesn't work that way, or most reporters at least seem to confuse the categories. Immigrants themselves are seen as the afflicted, illegal immigrants most afflicted of all, and thus the subject of reporters' solicitude. Their travails are recounted in detail. They're cast as the heroes of their story, battling against the man. Sometimes there's actually something to that. Employers stealing the wages of immigrants and the like. But this is an incomplete picture, to put it mildly. Putting to one side the fact that the immigrants, legal or illegal, made the decision to come here in the first place, what about the American victims of excessive immigration, the kind of people that Stephen read a letter from? Who comforts them? Where are their stories? Where are the stories about excessive immigration's effects on less skilled workers, on tech workers, on young people just starting in the labor market, on black Americans passed over by employers who prefer compliant Latin Americans, on ex-cons or recovering addicts seeking entry-level work to start rebuilding their lives? No reporters include their stories in coverage of immigration. And matters are even worse when it comes to afflicting the comfortable. The moneyed interests that actually drive most of immigration policy are not only not viewed by reporters with the healthy skepticism that's warranted, they're practically presented as victims themselves. The assertions of a corporate lobbyist whose job, after all, is to manipulate the immigration law in order to keep the labor costs down of their clients. Those assertions regarding immigration are simply taken as gospel by reporters who wouldn't believe a word they said in any other area of national policy. No reporter would think of transcribing the press releases of some lobbyists claiming that the smoke released by their client's factory is good for air quality. And yet, when Mark Zuckerberg's minions say that Americans are too stupid to write computer code, or when farmers tell fairy tales about crops rotting in the fields, otherwise skeptical reporters take down their words as though they're sitting at the feet of Plato. Today's honoree is an exception. Neil Munro, until just recently, was the White House correspondent for the Daily Caller. He started a new venture, which you may or may not be able to talk about. He's an editor, which is a bad sign, I think, but hopefully he'll still be actually writing. But when he was at the Daily Caller, he frequently covered immigration. He didn't start out doing that. Neil had a very Washington reporter resume, writing for journals that probably nobody outside Washington reads, such as Government Computer News, Defense News, Washington Technology, and then for more than a decade worked for National Journal, covering a whole variety of topics. And as worthy as all of this work was, he didn't garner national attention until he had the temerity to afflict the comfortable by asking President Obama a question. During a staged event in 2012, some of you may remember this, where the president announced his lawless amnesty for the Dreamers, Neil, thinking the president was done, jumped in and asked, "Why do you favor foreigners over Americans?" Followed up a little later with, "What about the American workers who are unemployed while you import foreigners?" Politico called this a surprising breach of etiquette. And you suspect it wasn't just because he ended up inadvertently interrupting the president, it's because he raised questions which are themselves a breach of etiquette on immigration for the press corps, which has internalized the comfortable's view on immigration. Neil himself is an immigrant from the Old Sod, from the Emerald Isle, and his exchange with the president typified his doggedness and shining light on immigration's impact on ordinary Americans. He's explored, as you see in the green books, we have more outside if you don't, the impact on less skilled workers and on white-collar tech workers, the impacts on communities saddled with Central American illegal aliens waved across the border by this administration, the impact on individual families whose immigration paperwork is held up because amnesty applicants are brought to the front of the line. He's chronicled the growth within elements of the Republican Party to develop a kind of pro-worker message on immigration. Immigrant stories are a legitimate topic for reporters, but they're not the only topic and hardly the most important one. The exclusive focus of too much of our media on those kind of stories needs an antidote, and part of that antidote has been Neil Munro's work. So I, with great pleasure, present Neil with the 2015 Eugene Katz Award for Excellence in the Coverage of Immigration. And I'll pull out the tchotchke that we give him. Neil, if you could come, just to so you can see what it looks like. Here we are. I'll unwrap it for you. There you go, Neil. It says Center for Immigration Studies 2015 Eugene Katz Award for Excellence in the Coverage of Immigration, Neil Monroe, Daily Caller. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this award. It's a, as they have already laid out, the standards for immigration coverage in this town are very low. So I managed to reach that very low bar to get this award. All I did when working at Daily Call is just apply the standard rules, count the numbers, follow the money, challenge authority, and write cleanly. Anyway, I used to ignore this issue because I covered defense, all sorts of other things, and I bumped into it the first time really in 2007 when there was a mention somewhere of the provisional Z visa. And so I looked up the details of the provisional Z visa, and after that I just, it was entirely clear which side was being deceptive and which side was not. So the provisional Z visa was an amazing thing that McCain and Kennedy tried to get into the law. I didn't do much. Jay Ontel, Lindsay got the band together again after the election, and but when thinking about why I've done all this, well, it's because I'm biased. I'm biased in multiple ways towards myself, my family, neighborhood, my profession, my neighbor. But for this category in this area, I'm biased towards Americans for a whole variety of reasons. One being I'm an immigrant, and I have a price to pay. I have a favor to return, and but it's easy to be biased against my profession. See, look, my profession is biased in favor of large-scale immigration for rational reasons. We all seek status, we all seek respect and money. My profession gets more by aligning itself with the Democratic Party because the party can deliver us reporters in Washington more status and more money and power. So we're biased towards them. We can't help it. We're not going to change that. Nothing will ever stop that. We are rationally part of the Democratic team. But we all the reporters all have their multiple overlapping biases. And my loyalty to Americans dragged me away. Anyway, the point about the numbers is also, when doing this area, all you have to do is do the obvious. Count the numbers. It took me a while to learn the numbers, and most people I know don't know the numbers, and most reporters don't know the numbers, the scale. In the end, well, so there was a Rasmussen poll which showed half Americans wouldn't even take a guess at the level of national immigration, which is, for my trade to have written so much about this subject of labor supply and wages, and for the population not to know the numbers, it's like doctors writing about prescriptions and not saying what kind of drug they want. Just take 10 pills and you'll do fine. It's preposterous that we are so unwilling to discuss the numbers. The same with the polls. I got a whole pile of articles writing about polls. It's just if you're biased, you can. This town's full of clever people whose biases allow them to do whatever they want, and the polls are an occasion for people with a pro-business, pro-government bias to constantly play up what is obviously not true. Well, they play up one side of Americans' attitude towards immigrants and labor supply. They like immigrants. They want to like immigration. they also want a lot less labor, a lot smaller labor supply right now. And it's not difficult to understand Americans want two different things. The following the money, nobody does this in covering immigration politics. No, nobody. When do you ever see articles about labor supply on the impact of wages? It's just not recognized. But all I did was a couple of those. How difficult is that? Really interesting stuff you find. But nobody ever. It is ridiculous. And then there's another part of the basic journalism task is to challenge authority. I was making a list of sometimes when I challenged authority. It's quite amusing. There was Zuckerberg had a poll, get 10 pollsters in, Republican pollsters, to do a very pro-labor supply speech. And so I asked all the pollsters, this was more or less the day after Cantor got his walking papers, and I said, so why should we trust you given the conflict between what you're claiming in your poll and what the voters are voting for? And the pollsters sat there in silence because they knew perfectly well the BS they had produced. One of them had the decency to say, lean forward his microphone and say, those are the numbers we got from the question we asked. And this part is true. I had a back and forth engagement with a pollster at a major American newspaper. I said, like, hey, you guys, you only show one side of the immigration debate. What's up with this number? Well, you look at the poll over there. Doesn't it tell you something skewed with what you announced? Anyway, back and forth, 14 emails. And the eventual result comes back. He says to me, we are not polling to find out what Americans think. We're polling to find out what Americans say. So this is an organization that you've read every day, and they're deliberately not trying. No, they're deliberately trying not to find out what Americans actually think. And this is a pollster. His whole profession is based on polling. It's so Anyway, there was there was another time when the importance of words is vital. I read in 1984 when I was a kid. I don't want words stolen from ordinary Americans by clever people. And so there was one time I was up on the Hill, and Reed said, I asked Reed a question about amnesty, and he said something along the lines of this, it's not an amnesty, there's no such as an amnesty. And I said, amnesty, amnesty. But I don't want powerful people to steal words from ordinary Americans. There was an incident in the Rose Garden which was completely unplanned. And he was announcing a policy decision which involved basically adding in, maybe 1 million foreign workers in a time of terrible low unemployment. And so I intended to ask a question, but I couldn't ask questions during the first phone call press conference that morning. They wouldn't accept me. They only invited questions from favorable reporters who asked lame, uninteresting questions. And then there was going to be a press conference that day in the White House, but no, it got converted into a discussion about the president's trip down to Mexico. There was only one occasion left. And the president, when he gives speeches occasionally, would stop as he leaves the podium. Normally he's very quick when he leaves the podium. He doesn't take questions. He finishes that sentence, that syllable, and he's gone, turned around, and halfway up the steps. You can't get him to turn around. But he has stopped occasionally and invited questions, like on Trayvon Martin. Anyway, so I was trying to... that was a planted question. And I was trying to ask a question, and I got my timing wrong. Amusingly enough, so I turned around thinking, okay, this is... I got my lead. What am I going to write about this? And then I noticed the reporters are coming towards me. And I got alarmed. And so one reporter comes up to me and says, what's your name? And I said, it's Monroe, and you'll spell it wrong. And so, the next day or so, I'm picking up the pieces, and I read Politico, and there's my name, spelled wrong. Well, some of my predictions turn out to be correct. But by and large, it's correct. So that has completely ruined my Google searches for myself. I can't get past that particular episode. unless I exclude Rose Garden. But the final thing is, that as a journalist, you just got to write cleanly and neatly. So I fight for words to keep the original meanings of words that people recognize. And I try and make facts simple. And in the end, I boil down the numbers to 4 million Americans turning 18 every year, 1 million legal immigrants, say 650,000 guest workers, plus roughly 800,000, which we didn't know about when I asked that question, about the roughly 800,000 a year in extra work permits the president is handing out. So that means roughly 4 million Americans go to find jobs in the market every year, and they face competition from, say, 2.5 million imported workers, migrants, guest workers, and such like. And my trade repeatedly acts as if that has no impact on wages. And they never ask why corporate profits are going up. You have to be really clever, really smart to find an excuse not to link those 2 points. But my trade is up to it. We're very clever. We're perfectly capable of portraying icebergs and whatever else as just of no consequence. So, although I put one thing at the end. There's one advantage. Being an immigrant and covering this issue is very useful. Mostly because Americans are so nice to immigrants that when I do something that's considered terribly gauche in my professional circles, as I did for a long time at National Journal, the response was, well, don't worry about it, I won't take it personally. He's just an Irish guy. So they'd excuse me for saying the most obvious stuff because I'm kind of like that little kid. And so anyway, it's been very amusing, and it's a great, covering this issue fairly and properly is a small part of the repayment I owe to Americans and their parents and ancestors. So thank you very much.